Hello there Internet, welcome to another episode of Weekly Art Tips. I'm your host Ando, and today we're going to be looking at RfrIce. The first piece we're going to be looking at is Mason Request for Candy Star Marie. So the first thing I really want to say about this image is this is a very ambitious pose, especially because having your chin moved back, it's got a fair amount of foreshortening to it. So props for attempting such a difficult pose. That being said, the neck does not look like it is moving back in the space. So that is to say, his neck is kind of merging with his chin, so it doesn't look like the chin is jutting forward at all. So I would recommend taking a look at an anatomy book, because this is, like I said, a very difficult pose to capture. So your chin is almost like a triangular shape from where it meets your neck, or almost like a diamond shape actually. So say that this is where his Adam's apple would be, and this would be his chin going up like this. So this is very crude, but like I said, looking at an anatomy book will really help you get this pose down a lot easier than what I'm doing over here. This is just from the top of my head, so it's probably not going to be 100% accurate. And the way that I have it is a bit too drastically moved back compared to the image that you're doing here. But yeah, that's basically my advice on the pose. As far as the design of this image, it's very striking. I like this nice smudge effect with the light in his eye. That's really cool. Also, I like the fact that you decided to go with different colors for your line work, so that's really nice. You've got kind of like a peachish brown over here. You have like a gray line over here, and then you also have black lines as well, so it definitely makes things stick out so his hair doesn't end up blending into his skin. So that's really nice. The hair itself is done pretty expertly. I really like the quality for your shading here, especially when you have like these highlights going in to your mid-tones. It definitely makes the color pop. So that's really cool. Another thing that I like about this image is just the way that his eyes are. They're very, very striking. You got the black part instead of the whites of his eyes, which is inverted and causes the viewer to be a little bit uncomfortable because it's not typically what you expect to see in someone's eyes. So it's kind of got that shock value to it. And the very, very bright red brings your eyes straight here, especially since this is a very, very light color with those little swooshy lighting parts. One thing that I would like to see is a bit more drastic shading in this image. It is right now. The colors are pretty local, but adding like really dark shadows, maybe where his hair, because you have like a lighter shadow kind of going into his face and into his clothing, which is really pushing those, will definitely add a new level of emotion to this image. Just having really, really deep shadows, like mostly up in his hairline, just basically where his hair overlaps, just having a really, really dark shadow added in there as well. Also, there should be a shadow under his nose. Even though he is tilted backwards, you would still see a shadow, at least in his nostrils. So adding a little bit of shading there and maybe under his lip would definitely help that out. And also on his teeth, because they would be moving back around his skull. So typically it would be a little bit more shaded back in that area. One thing about just form is that this neck collar that he has is a little bit too horizontal. It should have a bit of a curve to it. But other than that, I really don't see much else that I would change about this image. Maybe just having his collar meet up to where it would be theoretically if it were to be continuing back in space, like around where his neck is. Although I suppose it could technically be something like this, but the way that it is right now, it just looks a little unconnected. Other than that, I think this is a really cool image. It's got a nice amount of atmosphere to it. Just pushing some of the shadows like you have over here would really help that out. Especially in his ear back here. There isn't very much shading in his ear at all. So adding some more dark shadows in this would really, really push those values a lot. And I think that's all I'm going to say about this piece. Really, really solid work. Alright, the next piece is Doodling at School. And congratulations on being our second traditional artist to be featured. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about this piece is your color use. I really enjoy this highlight that you have going across his hair. It's very, very lovely, and it's got like a really delicate way that it kind of fades into the regular hair color. One thing that would be a little bit nicer to see is the hair is very, very dark, so maybe adding a little bit more of a lighter color in with the hair as well. Not so light as the highlights, but just like another tone of purple would really add a lot more dimension. I really enjoy the way that you rendered his eye. It's very, very nice, especially the little highlight bubble that you see in anime eyes. I think it looks very, very natural in this. One thing I would say about this eye is it doesn't continue like this eye. This eye is a relatively large shape for an eye, but it kind of ends on his eye over here, so it would theoretically continue on a bit more. So maybe just adding another eyelash line over here and here would really help that out. Another thing that would be cool to see is you have this really, really dark outline that you use for his eyelashes, or eyelid lines. It would be cool to see that kind of dark black brought into his nose, into his mouth, because the way that the image is just photographed, you kind of lose those details, so maybe adding a few more darker lines in the image will really help distinguish where parts of his body are, especially on this neckline, and just basically anywhere that you have skin overlapping more skin, because the tones are so similar, it would be easy to lose them. One thing I wanted to say is good job on adding some muscle tone. You can see exactly where his bonnet strings are, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, but if you don't know what a bonnet string muscle is, it's that muscle that you have like if your head's over here and this is your neck, it would be that muscle that goes by your jawline straight down over to your clavicle, and so it's a muscle that kind of goes up behind your ear. So you would end up seeing that if people have a bit more muscle tone in their neck. So you'd end up seeing that if people have a bit more muscle tone in their neck, and you have that right here. So that's a really nice addition to this image. It shows a lot more care for anatomy. You also have the clavicle bone here. Except the weird thing is that you have it kind of doing this little whale tail shape over here. The clavicle doesn't normally do that unless the person is like really, really bony. So I feel like just doing this top line would have been enough, and then if you wanted to add a bit more clavicle bone detail, then maybe having it a bit farther away, because it shows a really, really sharp definition of the clavicle, and if it was going to be that sharp of a definition, you would theoretically also see the rib cage as well, because that would be a very, very bony person. But it just, as it is right now, it looks like the clavicle is just protruding out of his chest. Although I suppose it could have also been meant as muscle tone, but just the way that it looks right now, it's not really working for me personally. But other than that, I really do enjoy the muscle tone that you did in the neck especially, and just the fact that you would think to add the clavicle right here. That's really nice. Let's talk about this hand, because the anatomy of this hand is not quite right, and hands are normally the most difficult thing for people to draw for the most part. So what I'm seeing so far is a really solid beginning to becoming really good at hands. You have dimension to the fingers. They don't end up getting sharp and pointy at the fingertips, so that's nice. You have good shape for the fingers. It's just that when you get down into this palm area, it's not quite right. A good way to remember how to shape a hand is that the palm is this kind of squarish shape, and then you have the fingers coming out from the top. You know, if I could draw. Okay, so more or less that's going to be the shape of a hand, but it's a little bit cut off here, so there's not enough depth to the palm, so maybe pulling that out just a tad, and then adding a little bit more bone structure to the wrist here, because you have a bone that kind of protrudes out of the wrist, so that would end up basically being the built-up palm part. And the way that the fingers end, they're a bit too long for this hand size, so I would end them around here. But one thing I will say is it's really nice that you added this kind of extra bit here, which is good, because the way that hands are, you kind of have a space in between, so when you have fingers that are together, you end up having this little bit of extra skin folding over. So I like the fact that you added that there. And then just one final thing about the shape of the palm is that the thumb kind of goes out a little. So just having that a little bit further in like that, and then maybe having this not bow in so much, this finger here. And that would roughly be the correct shape for this hand. Disregard what I said about the wrist bone. That really wouldn't work in this position. But yeah, for the most part, everything else in this image looks really nice. This ear is kind of in the wrong location, but it really is something that I just noticed after a while of looking at it. From first glance, it really doesn't look that out of place. If you wanted to make it in the correct position of where it should be on the head, it is the correct height, because normally your ear is about on level with your eye. It's just a little bit too far forward, so maybe scooting it back a little if you were going to redo this image would have looked better. But honestly, for what this is, it is a very good attempt at making more anatomically correct a bust image. I like the composition. It's not a symmetrical image. It's kind of off to the side, and that gives it a little more intrigue than it would be if it was just a completely symmetrical image. And I also like the expression here. It's like a bit coy, so I really like this a lot. So good job on both of these images. So thank you so much for stopping by Weekly Art Tips. Please check out RfrIce's DeviantArt page. I'll have the link in the description below. And if you'd like to be featured in a Weekly Art Tips critique video, please send 2 images to the Weekly Art Tips group. I'll have a link in the description below as well. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.